I want to introduce to you, I want you to give a round of applause to our friend Mark Miller. Mark?
Thank you. So thank you. So John, I have to confess that being with you in Bogota was like the second favorite thing of that trip. Being with my son, obviously. I was on the first trip with John Maxwell to launch the 1 Million Liter Mandate. We were in Mumbai, India, and that event was like 7 million liters later. My son has now become a trainer and needed me to pinch hit. So it was quite a blessing. But meeting you was right up there behind spending time with Justin. So thanks. Well, listen, I want to begin by dealing with the elephant in the room. Actually, it's probably a chicken. You hinted at it. But some of you, and it may not be all of you, but I've done this enough to know that some of you are wondering, why did John invite a chicken salesman? I mean, really, that is a legit question, and I get it all over the world, right? I mean, you think of all the people he could have invited today. Why did he invite a chicken salesman? Well, again, you'll have to talk to him, but I have a theory. I'm no stranger to ministry. God has given me the privilege to serve in ministry for almost 40 years. And so I understand that world. I've served as volunteer on senior staff. I've led discipleship ministries. I've led assimilation ministries. I've led men's ministries. I've led Sunday school organizations. I've been an elder and I've been a deacon and on and on and on. I've worked with international organizations, church organizations all over the planet, 30, 40 countries. And so that's over here. And I've had the privilege to serve at Chick-fil-A for almost 40 years. I'll tell you more of that story in a moment. And so here's my theory and my deeply held belief that God has been preparing me for 40 years for today. And I think he's been preparing you your entire life. And your entire ministry history has been leading up to this moment. He has prepared you for what he has next. And so whether you're in the marketplace, whether you're in ministry, whether you sell tires or chicken or whatever else you sell, my hope and my prayer for today is that you'll hear something that'll help you take a step forward, because I don't believe it's an accident that you're here today. And I'm excited and I'm thankful to be with you. So let me give you a little of my backstory on the chicken side. And if you want to talk about the ministry stuff, we can do that during Q&A. But I've done a lot of ministry stuff over the years. But the chicken story is, I guess, perhaps most relevant, because the content that I'm going to share today was actually born out of the chicken. So I don't know if that makes you excited or like depressed or, okay, but just stay with me for a minute here, or for a few minutes. So I started working in a restaurant, a Chick-fil-A restaurant, in 1970-something. I was just a kid, and I was awful in the restaurant. Awful. If you've worked in a fast food restaurant or any retail environment, you think about your worst team member. You're nodding over there. I hope it wasn't you, but you think about, I was that worst team member. And I knew that I was this close to being fired. I just knew it. I could sense it. So my boss came in one day and he said, I want you to wear this tie to work tomorrow. Well, I knew I was not being promoted to team leader, but I didn't have the courage to ask. And so I said, yes, sir, I'll wear the tie tomorrow. He said, and bring a heavy coat. I said, okay. I'm thinking we'll be outside. It's December in Georgia. It's not what you experience here for sure, but he wants me to wear this tie and bring a coat. So I said, okay. So I show up the next day, say, I'm here, sir, I'm ready, and I have my tie and my heavy coat. And he says, come on, we're leaving. I said, okay. So we walk out. We're a mall restaurant. That's all we had back then, no freestanding restaurants. We walk out to the back of the mall. We get in his van, and we start driving. Now, I don't know how long we drove. It felt like, in my memory, it feels like we drove for hours. And he didn't say a word, and I didn't say a word. It was scary. I was just a kid. I was scared spitless. I remember driving down the road, and I'm looking at him, and he's driving. I'm looking at him, and I'm going, where are we going, and what are we doing? And finally, after what seemed like forever, he stopped, and he said, get out. And I said, he's going to shoot me and leave me here. Then I said, but why would he want me to wear a Chick-fil-A tie if he's going to shoot me? I don't know. So I got out, and I closed the door. Now, I want to date this story. Half of you will get this, the younger people in the room, you'll have to get this explained to you later. Let me tell you what he did next. He rolled down the window. Some of you never, it's like, how do you roll down? I don't know how it works. Well, you turn this handle and the windows went down, right? And so he handed me some cards, and they were for free Chick-fil-A sandwiches. And he said, I want you to go up and down this street. I want you to visit every one of these businesses, and I want you to give them one of these cards and invite them to come and eat with us. He said, and I'll pick you back up on this corner in 2 hours. So now I tell people I was the first restaurant marketing director. And it had nothing to do with his vision or foresight. He was just trying to get me out of the restaurant. Now, fast forward, I knew my days were limited there. I mean, I was smart enough to know that. So I did what any well-intended, striving teenager would do. I went to the Chick-fil-A home office to apply for a job. The irony of that will strike you later. I couldn't fillet chicken, so I'm thinking, I'll go work at the corporate office. Now, that's, of course, no reflection on the other men and women who've chosen to work at the corporate office, but this was my path. So I walked in and I said, I'd like a job working in your warehouse. And the reception said, well, have a seat. And just a few minutes later, Truett Cathy, our founder, came out and took me into his office. Now, you're probably thinking, this is kind of weird, right? Why would the CEO of this big company be interviewing a punk to work in the warehouse? Well, I learned during that interview that I was interviewing to be the 16th corporate employee in the whole stinking place, like 15 other people. That was Chick-fil-A back then. And by God's grace, he gave me the job. And I started working in the warehouse, and I had the privilege to also work in the mailroom, because when you only got 16 people, you're going to have to wear multiple hats. And so my 2 hats were warehouse and mailroom. That was in 1978. That was in 1978. So I'm thinking about a career now. I mean, I don't want to rush into anything, but, you know, we're closing in on 40 years of chicken here, and it has been a fantastic journey. Now, part of the reason I tell you that is I think we all have context, but we have context based on our point in time and our perspective. And I've had a front row seat to the building of arguably one of the world's great organizations. And here's why I think that's relevant to you. I want to share some things we've learned along the way, because we have a point in common that I want to tease out. You might just intuitively sense this. What I've been trying to do, and what I feel like God has asked me to do for the last 40 years, is to help organizations thrive. And that's whether it's a church, a school, a nonprofit, an association, a hospital, a business. I've spoken at businesses all over the planet, or a chicken restaurant. And I think you're here because you want to help whatever you've been asked to steward thrive. I think that's what you want. So let me say this. I'm not assuming that the things I'm going to share will work with you, but I pray that you'll find something that might help you take a step forward, because I'm going to tell you the good, the bad, the ugly of the journey that we've been on. And then we'll try to unpack it even more this afternoon. Let me go ahead and foreshadow that. I'm going to introduce some concepts in this session, and then in the afternoon session, we're actually going to go deeper, and I'll say more about that. So I want to tell you the story of the journey we've been on trying to help our organization thrive. And it's a growing and changing organization. When I started, there were 75 restaurants. Today, we have over 2,000 restaurants. We're chasing $8 billion, that's with a B, in annual sales. In case you hadn't checked, that's a lot of chicken. That is a lot of chicken. And so that's what we're trying to do, but we also have the same challenges that you have. Maybe it's a different scale, but we have the same challenges. And so I'll share some of the things that we've observed, some of the things we've tried, and some of the things that we've learned on this journey. That's what we'll do. So let me start with a picture and see if in my pocket I have a pen. All right, are you ready? This is the good stuff. I want to give you the good stuff early in case you decide to leave. You ready? Are you getting this? I'm looking for note takers. Okay, here we go. There's more. Somebody's ahead of me. So what is this? I heard pyramid. It is shaped like a pyramid. It's actually not a pyramid. What is it? It's a Chick-fil-A restaurant. You can't tell? Okay, well, it's a Chick-fil-A restaurant, and it actually might mimic your organization in some shape or form. But just in the Chick-fil-A example, let me prove it to you, because the transactions happen here across the counter, and these are the happy customers. This one's not quite as happy. He's waiting on waffle fries. But generally, they're happy customers, right? This is a Chick-fil-A restaurant. So let me tell you, for 40 plus years, we had a primary strategy to help the business thrive. Now, I want to be really clear. We had thousands of strategies. We had a strategy for this, a strategy for that, but I'm talking pull way up at the highest level. Like, what is your philosophical bent? What is your big idea that makes the organization work? And we had an overarching strategy for over 40 years, and it was basically, if we can help this point leader grow, this is what we call our restaurant operator. If we can help the point leader grow, everybody wins. John Maxwell says, everything rises and falls on leadership. We actually believe that. We actually believe that. And so for about 40 years, we were trying to help the men and women who run that restaurant grow. Now, we're still trying to turn out new products and new uniforms and be sure we put the locations in the right places. I'm not saying all that was unimportant, but we believe that our critical success factor, singular, is this leader. Now, I don't know if that's good news or bad news to you, but that was the journey we were on. And for about 40 years, it worked brilliantly. And then something happened. Some of our best leaders, their businesses began to plateau. And we were trying to figure it out because it didn't look like it was driven by market conditions. It's like, okay, what's sales, profits, customer satisfaction? It's like we're stagnant in places we shouldn't be stagnant. Some of you may be in that situation with your business or your nonprofit or your ministry. It's like there's still opportunity for what we do. Why might we be stagnant? Now, again, I don't want to be simplistic here. There could be a myriad of factors, but for us, there was a factor. This leader hit a wall. Personal capacity limits. Now, I don't know if you've encountered this or not, but here's our belief and our experience. At some point, every leader, no matter how talented, no matter how strong, no matter how gifted, there'll be a point when you can't do any more, the way you've been doing it. And when an enterprise is small, whether it's a business, a ministry, a sub-ministry, a nonprofit organization, a school, when it's small, a talented and gifted leader can do it, right? You be the man or you be the woman, and you can just do it, right? Nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's the way almost every small enterprise and endeavor begins. With a passionate leader with a vision and a plan, and they go to work. But at some point, it won't scale. It will not scale. And I don't know if you're there or not. Again, I'm not trying to project, but some of you are going, why is it what has been entrusted to me has stopped growing? It may be because you can't do it the way you used to do it. You got a book when you came in. I'll say more about that later, but it's chess, not checkers. The metaphor is we all start as leaders, virtually all of us as checker players. But at some point, the board flips, and then it's a different game. And if you don't change the game, if you're playing the wrong game, right? You're still trying to play checkers in a chess world, you actually lose. And so we had leaders who were at their personal leadership capacity limits. So that ended about a 40-year chapter for us. Now, we think the strength and character and integrity and competence of that point leader is always a priority. So this isn't about minimizing that. It's about expanding that capacity. And so we went on about a 10-year journey of trying to grow leadership capacity. And the idea, what we called it, was creating high-performance leadership teams, HPLT. And simply stated, this is a leadership capacity play. So, your name, sir? Eric. Okay, let's say Eric is the leader, and Eric has an IQ of 248. God bless you. We're all proud to know him. Guess what, Eric? When you put these 4 people with you, you just got smarter. And I don't care if their IQ is 100 each. You're now smarter, right? I mean, I think this idea of a team it's overlooked and undervalued. It's when we put our heads and our hearts together, we can accomplish more. And I'll say more about that as we go along. But this was a big shift for us to go to our restaurant operators and say, have you considered building a team? And for the last almost decade, we've been on this journey of encouraging and casting vision and helping them embrace this idea if they choose, because our restaurants are independently operated. So management and leadership practices are at the sole discretion of that independent operator. But what we do corporately is we try to seek out best practices and share those and cast vision and share best practices and highlight successes. It's really more selling and not much telling. But over time, more and more of our businesses are being led by a team because it increases leadership capacity. And this has been fantastic for our business. Now, let me transition. Again, I don't want to meddle, but I want to challenge appropriately. Some of you need to think about your team. At that leadership level, it's like, how strong is your team? For us, that has been so liberating. We've seen performance just, it's almost so obvious. I don't even know how much time I want to spend on it. Again, no matter how good you are, when you put 4 or 5 people around a table with you, competent, skilled, gifted, passionate people, amazing things happen. And I've seen it happen in ministry over and over and over and over and over again, in addition to what I've seen in the marketplace. I've seen ministries that were here go to here, and all they changed was they got some like-minded leaders around the table and said, let's do this together. So that was the next chapter for us. So in 2010, we were in a long-range planning meeting. We were looking at the year 2020, and the question was asked, what do we want to be true in a decade that's not true today? So again, that may be a fun question for some of you to think about as it relates to your ministry, as it relates to your business, as it relates to your nonprofit organization. Maybe it's a pretty good question for you to ask for yourself. What do I want to be true in a decade that's not true today? So that was the context of this meeting. Somewhere in the conversation, it turned to me, and Tim Tosopoulos, who's now the president of Chick-fil-A, at that time, this was his leadership team. He was executive vice president of the planet or something. I'm not sure what his title was. But he looked at me and he said, what's after high-performance leadership teams? You love senior leaders that are thinking, right? And he's thinking, we know what we did for 40 years. At this point, we were about 3 or 4 years in this journey. We were already getting some traction, and he's already saying, okay, what's next? He looked at me. And it was the first time that I had drawn the picture that I'm scribbling up here for you right now. So I went back to the flip chart, and I said, well, let me be sure we're all clear on the truth about high-performance leadership teams. And they kind of, 6 or 8 people in the room, they kind of looked at me funny, like, what's the truth? I said, the truth is these teams harness the talent, the passion, the energy, and the creativity of 5 or 6 people. And that's been really good. Not taking it back. But I don't think that's the future. I think the future is around the question of what do you do for the 50 or 60 people who aren't on the leadership team? In our case, we've got 60 to 70 people in each restaurant, right? Those operators employ that many people. And I said, I think what might be next is creating a high-performance organization. They got almost as quiet as you did. Really? Is that what's next? I said, it's what I'm thinking. So Tim looked at me, as only the best senior leaders can do. He said, do you know how to build a high-performance organization? I said, I have no idea. I said, but it sounds like a great concept to me. And he said, I think you're right. You better figure it out. So I did what you would do in that situation. I put together a team of really smart people. And I said, guess what we get to figure out, right? We want to find a way to harness the talent, the passion, the energy, and the creativity of everyone. It's like, oh, that'd be hard. Well, yeah, it'd be hard. That'd be really good, too. I mean, so just for a moment, imagine in your context, in your business, in your nonprofit, in your school, in your church, if you could harness the talent, the passion, the energy, and the creativity of everyone in your organization. You're probably thinking what my guy said, that'd be hard, and that'd be really good. And so we started on a journey. And we knew we weren't the first ones to think about this. I tell people ask often about, our invention or our creation. I said, we didn't invent anything, we didn't create anything. I said, we began a quest for truth. And we said, once we find truth, we'll try to find a way to make it culturally relevant. And that's all we have attempted to do. And so we, again, did what you would probably do. We began to look at organizations that had a reputation of being high-performance organizations. Everybody from the Navy SEALs to world championship teams. We went to consulting groups like Bain and McKinsey, who for big checks will help you do this. And we basically scoured the planet for the best practices in this arena of creating high-performance organizations. And so we formed a point of view. And then we said, we really want to try to validate this before we stand up and tell our people and then, ultimately maybe tell the world. We think these are the critical elements in creating a high-performance organization. So we ran a pilot, and so any finance people in the room or accountants, I can explain all that to you later. Well, actually, I can't really explain it. I can tell you what they told me because I don't understand it either. But they went out. We had restaurants where we were going to teach them these concepts, and they created control groups so that we could compare in like restaurants. And we ran a 12-month pilot to actually see if the ideas I'm about to share with you would work and would have effect. And the reason I'm standing here is, yes, indeed, if you do the things we've talked about, you can create your own high-performance organization. And certainly they would have their own personality, their own distinctives based on the leadership in place. But we do believe that there are 4 common elements. In the book, we call them 4 moves that high-performance organizations make. And so my plan here in the moments that remain is to unlock these at a high level, and then I will go deep into some of the more tactical implications in our second session. So with that said, there are 4 moves, and I think I'll depict them up here for you. Now, again, I want to ask for your help. This is relatively new content, so I don't know if that makes you feel better or worse. I mean, it's fresh, you're getting it fresh, but if you've got a better way to depict this, tell me later. Because my team still says what I'm about to draw for you may not be the best way to do this. Some of you have asked, this came up in our meeting last night, because people think about Chick-fil-A, wow, Chick-fil-A. We do some things right, we do a lot of things wrong, and we're learning. But this is a new idea for us. Remember, I'm telling you the journey. We made the decision in 2010 to do this work, to figure this out. We didn't launch this until 2015. So we spent 5 years. You're going to see this and go, it took you how long? Yeah, well, I'm sorry. But we sell chicken. So this was hard for us. It was really hard. And so we spent 5 years for me to draw these 4 circles I'm about to draw for you, okay? I know you'd have done it in a week. Well, you would have because your IQ is 247 or something. But I want to draw these 4 circles for you. But so we're early in the journey. So when this is all over, if you go, I got a better way to share this, I'd love to hear from you, okay? So I'm just going to ask for your help. But we think there are 4 moves that we found consistent across the planet in high-performance organizations. And I'm going to do it like this. This is supposed to be a circle. Okay, don't copy my handwriting. All right, the 4 moves. First, all high-performance organizations bet on leadership. That says bet on leadership. You'll have to listen because you can't read it. Okay. All high-performance organizations bet on leadership. Now, I don't know if this would shock you or not. We actually do believe, as I mentioned earlier, everything rises and falls on leadership. I'm still looking for a high-performance organization that's not well led. And I can't find one. I cannot find a high-performance organization that's not well led. So I don't know what your experience is. Again, would love to hear from you. But whether we look at the Navy SEALs or whether we look at Zappos or whether we look at whoever we look at, Disney or FedEx, I mean, any of these organizations that you would probably intuitively say, yeah, they're probably a high-performance organization. They all bet on leadership. And it is a bet. Our restaurant operators helped us with this language, and we were debating the language. And they said, well, it is a bet. Now, not a bet the farm, willy-nilly on, some random horse, right? No, this is a calculated, strategic, and thoughtful bet, but it's a bet. We said, why do you call it a bet? They said, because when you identify someone that you want to invest in as an emerging leader, several things can happen. A, you may be wrong. B, they may not live up to your expectations. They may have some runway and some potential, but they just can't go where you thought they could go. Or C, maybe you're right and they leave. It's like, oops. So in all three of those scenarios, you could argue you lost the bet. But our belief is if you don't place the bet, you're going to be underled. And I see businesses and nonprofits all over the planet that are overmanaged and underled. Right? They're real good at today and they stink at creating a preferred future. And leaders are the architects of the future. So if you don't have men and women who can do that, oh, and by the way, if you don't have a bench strength, so you'll be prepared. I had one of our restaurant operators call me not long ago, and he told me he had lost his marketing director. And I hated that. I knew his marketing director. And I said, well, man, I hate that. I said, who's next? He said, I don't have anybody. I said, congratulations. He said, on what? I said, on being the new marketing director. He said, what do you mean? I said, you're not going to run a $5 million business without a marketing director, are you? He said, I guess not. I said, well, you're it, right? He had not prepared for the inevitable. Now, it may not be inevitable in your context, but people do move, people do die, people do quit. I mean, I don't know. People do get transferred. Any number of things can happen. And so not only is it a bet on current leadership and growing your current leadership and attacking emerging leaders and identifying them and investing in them, but it's about working on the bench. It's working on the pipeline. We're trying to be 3 deep corporately. We want a leader and a backup and a backup. Now, they're probably not all of the same level of competency and proficiency, but we want 3 deep. And we're doing those annual reviews to who's next and who's after them. So, something for you to consider. We think all high-performance organizations bet on leadership. All right, now notice the way I tried to depict that. Once you have good leadership, there are many things that leaders do, and that's another talk for another day. But in this context, there are 2 things that we see true in all high-performance organizations. They act as one, which is really about alignment. Now, I don't know if this would surprise you or not. Alignment matters. It really, really, really does. Sometimes we use the example and the illustration that this whole leadership challenge can be thought of like a tug of war. So let me say how this shows up at a Chick-fil-A restaurant. May not be true in your case, but in a Chick-fil-A restaurant, when a leader begins their journey, not by design, but often by default, he or she ends up pulling against their team in this tug of war. And you're thinking, well, that makes no sense. How could that be? Well, the leader is trying to get those people to wear their name badges, to come to work on time, bring your uniform. And these people over here are going, whatever, I can't even find my name badge, and I'll get here when I can, right? Not that you've ever had that situation, but the leader's pulling against people. But because we have such strong, big dog leaders, he or she can do that for a while. But it's exhausting. So the enlightened ones go over here and get 4 or 5 of those people, and they bring them over here. They're now the leadership team. And they're enlisted primarily to help pull. There's still a fundamental problem. You're pulling against the balance of your team. Really? Yeah, use the holding systems and do table touch-ins and say my pleasure. And over here they're going, I don't know, I might, right? So creating a high-performance organization is about getting all these people on the same side of the rope. Now you're still in a tug of war. You're pulling against your competition and towards your goals. To me, that's a big idea. Like, you're always pulling, Who are you pulling against? In a ministry context, you don't need to be pulling against your volunteers. You need to be pulling against Satan, not the volunteers. Right? Get the volunteers over there with you, which is one reason Act as One is so important. What happens if you get all those people over here and they're passionate and engaged, energized, and they're not pulling in the same direction? That's not a good thing. Quick story about that. One of our restaurant operators tells me he was in a mall. He's a mall operator, and he chose not to work one night. But he called back about 9 o'clock to check on the crew and see how things were going. He said he was greeted by a young lady on the phone. He said she was so excited, he thought she was going to hyperventilate. She said, "This has been the best night in the history of the business. Thank you for putting me on the schedule. It's been amazing. It's been awesome. It's been wonderful." He said, hold on. He said, "What were the sales?" She said, "That's the best part. We haven't had a single customer, comma, and we're going to be out of here by 9:30. This leader confessed to me that he had a flashback. He had several flashbacks. You know how that happens sometimes? He said, "What have I been talking about a lot? Controlling wages, labor costs, and closing down the store quickly." So one of the potential consequences, if you don't act as one, if you don't get people aligned, they'll guess as to what's important to you in your organization. And they may guess wrong. I've got so many stories on this. I hope none of them are your stories, but I tried this at a church one time. I was consulting, for lack of a better term, just volunteering, just trying to help this church, and I sensed that they weren't acting as one. Even before we had this model, I've always been a big fan of alignment. I think it kind of makes sense. Tell people where you're trying to go, what you're trying to do, and get them to help you, right? So I began to ask these alignment questions, and the senior pastor said, "Son." So anytime somebody says "son" to me, I stand up a little straighter. I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I want you to know that we have been a church for 150 years. I said, "Well, sir, I'm not questioning your longevity. I'm questioning your alignment. So if you want to be bold when you go back home to your ministry, your nonprofit, or your marketplace team, do what I did that day. I handed out 3x5 cards. Pick a question. Pick any question. Ask them, what's our number one goal? Make them write it down and hand it in. Ask them, why are we here? Ask them to write it down and pass it in. Pick anything. See what level of alignment you've got at that senior level. In that example, I collected 12 cards. They were so eloquent, they were so beautiful, and they were all different. If there's no alignment at the senior level, it will be impossible to have alignment throughout the organization. Actually, impossible. One of my mentors was Dr. Howard Hendricks, who taught at Dallas Theological Seminary for 60 years. Here's the way he said it. He said, if there's mist in the pulpit, there's fog in the pew. That'll sink in later. Here's the deal. It doesn't get clearer, right? So you got to have crystal clarity at the leadership level to have any chance of it going in the right direction. So this whole idea, high-performance organizations act as one. Last thing I'll say about this, when we did our test with our Chick-fil-A restaurants, we just told our restaurant operators to go back and tell their teams what's important. You can tell them the mission, the values, the goals, the strategy, anything you think's important, but tell everybody. Remember, this is about everybody. Don't just tell your leaders. Sales, profits, customer satisfaction, everything skyrocketed, which revealed to us that we had a lot of people who were just going through the motions. They were serving as hired hands before, doing what they were told, when they were told, how they were told, if they were told. And now they understood some of the bigger picture. They understood some of the key goals. They understood the core values, or they understood the purpose or mission. We've never found a high-performance organization that didn't act as one. Third, you want to bet on leadership. You want an organization that acts as one. You also want to win the heart. High-performance organizations win the heart. This is about engagement. This is about creating a context and an environment where people will invest themselves fully. This is where people don't just show up, but they show up energized, and they care, and they're willing to give their all, and they're willing to give their best. Ken Blanchard is a friend of mine. He and I co-authored a couple of books together. He talks about when somebody's brand new in the marketplace or in a ministry, his theory, and I actually believe this, is they show up as an enthusiastic beginner. He said the leadership test is how enthusiastic are they 6 months later, and how enthusiastic are they 6 months later, and how enthusiastic are they 16 years later. He contends, and I believe, that leaders are responsible for the context. Some would say the culture. And is it a culture that engages? Is it a culture that wins the hearts and minds of people? And so we'll talk more about some best practices this afternoon on how you might choose to do that. But engagement's been popular for at least a decade in leadership circles. At least that people started writing books about it. Marcus Buckingham and Gallup started doing research around it. And I will say this, Marcus and the Gallup folks, if you're not familiar with them, they're probably the preeminent global research company. And Marcus always says, if you've got an interesting question, why not go ask 1 million people to see if it's true or not, right? So that's Marcus's worldview. And so they did a lot of research on engagement. And they believe, catch this, there is a direct correlation. I don't know how to say that any stronger. When engagement of people goes up, sales, profits, customer satisfaction, and anything else you're doing will improve. A direct correlation. So I think the question for all of us is how is the engagement level of our people, and what can we do about it? Now, Marcus, I believe, takes a bit of a narrow view because he doesn't acknowledge the larger context. I mean, he does personally, but that research wasn't about this stuff. But to me, it underscores. We didn't go into this looking for that answer, but we found it. That we actually think Gallup and Marcus got it right. Engagement is a huge element, and it is almost entirely under the control of leaders. When you see the annual survey that Gallup does, this last year, I think they said 65% of American workers are not engaged. That's not an indictment of the worker. That's an indictment of leadership. High-performance organizations work strategically and intentionally to win the heart. And then finally, notice these arrows. They both point to the bottom. If you're well-led, you're aligned, and your people are engaged, you are positioned to do what all high-performance organizations do. They excel at execution. Now, when I present this, I've had leaders say, now you're talking, that's the one I care about. I even had a leader tell me, I don't care about all that other stuff, it's just fluff. He said, all I want to do is execute. And I said, good luck with that. I love execution too. Because, hey, why do I love execution? Greatness hinges on execution. Let me say that again. That may be the big idea. Greatness hinges on execution. If you can't deliver your product or service as promised on time to specs, you'll never be a great organization. You'll never be a high-performance organization. If the rides didn't work and the people were surly and the parks were dirty, you wouldn't think they're a high-performance organization. If for FedEx, half the time the packages showed up and half the time they didn't, you wouldn't think they're a high-performance organization. How about at Chick-fil-A? If the people weren't friendly and the place were dirty and the food weren't fresh, you wouldn't give a flip about our corporate purpose. So greatness hinges on execution. But if you'll do these other things, you increase the likelihood that you can execute. The word picture I'm using right now, we just came through the Olympics. Think about the gymnast that says, all I want to do is the dismount. Well, that is the most flashy part usually. That's what people talk about. Did you stick the landing? Where do you think they get the height, the energy, and the momentum to stick the landing? In the routine that precedes the dismount. When you think about a high-performance organization, whether it's a church, a nonprofit, a school, a widget manufacturer, a service company, or a chicken restaurant, those that execute consistently, those that excel at execution consistently, it's not because they scream and holler about execution. It's because they bet on leadership. They act as one, and they win the heart. And that increases the likelihood that you can stick the landing. So let me close this session with a quick story. A friend of mine tells me this. I wish I had been there, but he met Ronald, the omelet maker, at Pirate City in Bradenton, Florida during spring training. And he says he's the best omelet maker on the planet. I said, well, how do you know? He said, first of all, he's making 15 omelets at one time. Second, on day 2, when my friend shows up, who's the leadership coach for the Pirates, he shows up on day 2 and Ronald remembers his order. He's thinking, I've got the Rain Man of omelets here. This is crazy, right? So he starts talking to the coaches about Ronald, and they say, oh, do you know Ronald's story? And he said, no, I just know he's a fabulous omelet maker. And they said, well, he's really going through hard times because his daughter had an accident and she's in a coma. So he leaves here and he goes to the hospital, and then he comes back and makes omelets. So my friend went to him the next day and said, I just want to encourage you. I heard about your daughter. I want to let you know I'll be praying for you. And by his own admission, he said it was kind of awkward at that point. He didn't know what to say. So he said, he turned the conversations to omelets, and he says, man, you're really good at what you do. And he said, well, thanks, I try. And he said, don't you wish you knew how many omelets you made? He said, oh, I do know. He said, what do you mean you know? Said, oh, I do. On average, I make 127 a day, and yesterday I made 134. Like, what? So my friend is telling this story to Clint Hurdle, the manager, later that day. And Clint said, that makes perfect sense. And my friend says, how does that make perfect sense? He's more dialed in than a lot of these guys out here trying to make it to the big leagues. And you got an omelet maker who is all in. Clint said, he's not making omelets. Randy said, what are you talking about? I just had the 2 best omelets of my life. What do you mean he's not making omelets? He said, he's not making omelets. He's doing what all the rest of us are trying to do. He's trying to win a World Series. They're all pulling on the rope in the same direction. And that's my hope and my prayer for you, for your organization, for your ministry, for your team, for your nonprofit, for your church, and for your school, is what would happen if we could get everybody on the same side of the road, not making omelets, but trying to win the World Series. So this afternoon, we'll talk about some of the specific tactics that will help you take some of these concepts and turn them into reality.